This is a Film Stories original podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and once again, I'm being joined by Always Hold On to Smallville host and creator, Mr. Zach Moore. Hello again.
Hi, Tony. Hi, listeners. Happy to be back.
It's a pleasure to have you back, and hopefully for a better episode to enjoy than than our last exploration of shapes.
Yes. You know, I had a note here. This is a rare, good, standalone Chris Carter episode we're talking about today.
That's an unusual one. Yeah, that
I
doesn't
know, right?
happen very often. Well, today we are looking at Darkness Falls. Darkness Falls is the 20th episode of the first season of The X-Files. It first premiered on April the 15th, 1994, and was written, as you said, Zach, by Chris Carter. Directed also by Joe Napolitano, who, if I'm not mistaken, directed The Jersey Devil, which was...
Really?
Yeah, he
Interesting continuity here with me on these episodes.
Indeed. I would love to say we did that on purpose, but...
Nope, we did not.
We did not. Yeah, he directed The Jersey Devil. These are the only two episodes of The X-Files he ever directed, so this is his last one. And in this episode, Mulder and Scully become trapped in a forest when a group of loggers mysteriously disappear, only to discover a very strange natural force.
Take a good look, Scully.
What am I looking at?
30 loggers working a clear-cutting contract in Washington State. Rugged, manly men in the full bloom of their manhood.
Right, but what am I looking for?
Anything strange, unexplainable, unlikely? Boyfriend?
I don't know, I give up, Mulder.
You give up? Funny, that's apparently what the Federal Forest Service has done as well.
Why, what happened to them?
In a word, they vanished. Or so it would appear. This is Doug Spinney and Stephen Teague. They call themselves monkey wrenchers, the guys who drive spikes into trees, sabotage logging equipment, and otherwise make life miserable for lumberjacks and lumber mills.
Eco-terrorists or militant environmentalists.
Right. 2 weeks ago, the group of loggers I just showed you radioed a message that Spinney and Teague had gone on a spree, spiking trees, sabotaging equipment, and causing general mischief. 1 week later, all radio communication was cut off.
Do they know why?
No. The lumber company that employs the men has asked the Federal Forest Service to look into the matter. 2 officials were sent in a week ago, and no one has heard from them since.
It appears as if these monkey wrenchers are doing more than just a little mischief-making.
That's what the lumber company and the Federal Forest Service are accusing. They've asked the FBI to investigate. I had to pull a few strings to make sure we got the case.
For an eco-terrorism case? Do I dare ask why?
In 1934, long before anyone even knew what an eco-terrorist was, a WPA crew working that same area vanished without a trace. Not one of those men was ever found or heard from again.
And you suspect what? Bigfoot?
Not likely. That's a lot of flannel to be choking down, even for Bigfoot. Come on, Scully, it'll be a nice trip to the forest.
So, Zach, Darkness Falls. Where would you rate it out of 10?
You know, I think this is a solid episode. It's not one of my favorites or anything, but I think it was a really... As I mentioned, a surprisingly good standalone Chris Carter episode, because he has a reputation for writing just not good standalone episodes, like The Jersey Devil, for example.
Yes, indeed.
I was going to give this one a 7, which is, you know, strong, not that memorable, but a strong episode with some really good Mulder and Scully moments.
Yeah, I would go with the 7 as well, actually. I think that's a fair approximation. I remember liking this more when I was younger. And I don't know why. I watched it again, obviously, recently. And while it's good, and I would put it more in the higher tier of the episodes in season 1, at the same time, I was a little bit underwhelmed, and I think it's because I don't think it quite always capitalises on the potential it has, because it's one of those episodes. It's very reminiscent of Ice earlier in the season.
Yes, I was going to say, it's like Ice in the Forest.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. But the difference is that Ice, because of its sheer location being in the Antarctic and being very much a story, well, it was basically the thing.
Ice is the thing for TV.
Basically, yeah. It had the benefit of being able to get into a lot more into the psychology of what was going on, whereas this, it's a little bit more simplistic, and it's much more about the whole idea of, deforestation and, man abusing nature and things like that. But ultimately, it doesn't really have that same... I don't think it has quite that same sense of tension and build that Ice does. From the moment they get into the base, and then everything starts to go wrong and it ramps up. I don't think it quite has that same feeling that they really can't get out of this.
Yeah, interesting you say you liked it less. I actually liked this episode a little more when I watched it again.
Okay.
To talk about it on the podcast, because when I first saw it, I felt like it was very repetitive. Like, they show up, it gets dark, so they go inside and they keep the lights on. They talk about, something's going to happen. Something happens. It gets dark. They go back inside. They keep the lights on. They talk about it some more.
Yeah.
They go back outside. It seems to, like, it happens like 3 times, the same series of events. And it felt kind of repetitive. And then the ending was interesting. It did feel like, we're running from the sunset. I don't know how but I think it was. Well, we'll get to the ending when we get to it.
Yeah,
I think it definitely has some pros and cons. So, but you're right. Everything didn't quite all come together, and they didn't take full advantage of their setup as much as they could have, I think.
No, I agree. The episode was inspired by Chris Carter's interest in tree ring dating. Which he'd studied.
A fascinating hobby.
I bet he's a killer guy at parties. Tree ring dating, which he studied in a course that he'd taken at college, and tree ring dating it's called dendrochronology is the actual term for it, and it's the scientific method of dating based on the analysis of patterns of tree rings, also known as growth rings, which does definitely come into the story later, and it's the whole way of it's carbon dating for trees, really, to find out how old they are and what they can tell us about the past and about the nature and ecology and things like that. So it's an interesting idea. But he did say apparently the episode wasn't specifically designed to present a message about conservation. Really, Chris?
Really? Okay, so this explains why it's good, because he didn't try to shove a message down our throat. It just kind of organically came from the story, as opposed to something like, I don't know, Babylon. I bring that up because I hate Babylon, and I want everyone to know how much I don't like it as much as I can.
Please, feel free, Zach. Every time you're on the show, feel free to slam Babylon. I'm happy with that, because I hate it.
Well, because he was obviously trying to get a message across with that episode. What that message is, who knows? He was obviously trying. So that's interesting that he says he wasn't trying, because I actually had thought, you know what, Chris Carter, this was a nice, subtle job of presenting a current event issue, forestation and, man and the environment and abusing the environment, things of that nature. And you didn't get too preachy about it, and it was just very organic in the story. Well done. And here we go. He didn't even try. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think at times that the script is a little bit on the nose with it. There's times when the character of Spinney says, there's one line where he says, "Oh, wouldn't it be ironic if the tree they cut down was what unleashed their doom," and things like that. And it's a little bit, well, okay, I get the point, right? That cutting down these trees is bad, and they literally bring on something they can't control. But
those guys talk that way, those activists, like they really do talk that way. Like I have a note here. One of his funniest lines to me, Spinney, the Spinney character, he says, "The only crime here to investigate is the death of that tree."
Yeah.
But that's exactly how these guys talk, and that didn't really bother me.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way of looking at it, really, yeah. But on the whole, I do agree, actually, that it is much more a message that comes out through the characterization and through the story, as opposed to just whacking you on the head with something and going, "Oh, don't worry about the rest of it. This is what you should know." And it also doesn't, as much as the guy who is the conservation... The more corporate tree guy, he's very unsympathetic and he's a complete bastard, really.
He's the Paul Reiser from Aliens.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. He's very unsympathetic. So I think, really, if Chris Carter was honest, he's much more on Spinney's side than the other. but at the same time, Spinney also is not on the level either, you know, and he ends up coming a certain comeuppance. So there's two sides to it really, and I think he does manage to present a fairly balanced argument overall. He'd said he'd wondered if a tree is thousands of years old, why couldn't it be a time capsule for something which had existed that far back in history? Which I think is a really nice idea. He said, I wanted to do something that had cocoons and nests, and I also wanted to do a bottle show, which is a show where you take the characters up into the woods and keep them there for a certain amount of time and pit them against each other. Now, obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with watching Smallville, because this is a show that would do it as well, the bottle episode concept.
Yeah. Actually, to be honest, it's more of a Star Trek thing than Smallville.
Yeah, that's
because,
true. Yeah.
It's like, okay, we don't have a lot of... and it's usually a budgetary reason. It's like, okay... let's just keep everything on the ship this week. We're not beaming down anywhere. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's all going to be on the Enterprise or something like that. But yeah, bottle episodes. But those can create some of the best episodes because you're forced to have good writing and have good character interaction to drive the story instead of just going from place to place to place. The characters are, you know, your point of interest the entire time.
Absolutely. Although, as it turns out, it didn't actually turn out to be an easy bottle episode show to film. It mainly had to be filmed in 2 separate forests for a start.
Oh, wow.
And Chris Carter said that the first day of the episode, I woke up and looked out the window and there was a blizzard. And I thought they were never going to make it, that nothing would match from that day on. And yeah, the distance involved in travelling for the relatively far away forest locations made the shoot, in Joe Napolitano's words, much harder. He said, where we wanted to shoot 8 pages of script a day, we could only do 6 because we had all that extra travel time. So what originally was turned out to be a cost-cutting, quicker episode was really hard. I suppose this is the difficulty of doing something still outdoors. You know, if they were doing a bottle episode indoors, you know.
Having to go out on location like defeats the entire purpose of the ball episode. Come on, Chris Carter. Well, and that's still with the X-Files. There's not a set like on the X-Files. There's Mulder's office and his apartment, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, they don't really go to the same locations all the time. It's not like Star Trek where they're always on the bridge or the transporter room or something.
Well, exactly.
They have to go somewhere when you're shooting the X-Files.
Yeah. It would be a difficult show really to do a bottle episode, yeah. Which is, I suppose, really why they didn't really do many that you could traditionally think of as a bottle episode. You know, like you say, you think of shows like Star Trek or, you know, and Smallville did it, and Stargate was another big one that did that as well a lot. You know, shows that were very long running and had like 20-odd episode seasons and things. You know, did a lot of bottle episodes, but you don't really associate that with the X-Files because of that, right. Like you said.
There was like a siege on the FBI building and we're all trapped in the basement or something. You know? that really seems like an episode they would have done at some point.
Yeah. I'm almost sad they didn't, really.
Yeah. Maybe in season 11 we'll have
maybe
Einstein and what's his name?
Oh.
Miller and Einstein.
Miller and Einstein. Don't get us started.
Like, if I'm going to be on all these episodes where I'm trashing terrible episodes, I'm going to bring up Babylon as much as I can.
You're going to be on most of season 10. Let's be honest.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So, it was a difficult episode to shoot, but yeah, it's a pretty good one. So let's get into it a little bit. We're thrown right into the middle of a very tense opening, aren't we? You know, there's the forest guys who are already there, the loggers. They're in the middle of this situation that the rest of them find themselves in. They know these bug creatures are around. They've got to get out of there, and they basically start running, don't they? They just leg it, and it's still the day. And again, it's like, to use the ice parallel, it's like ice in the sense that when we got into ice, it was in the middle of the carnage and what had happened, and it was a much more creepy, slow build teaser. This is much more fast-paced. But it's the same principle, isn't it? People who are in a location cut off, who are facing something they can't get away from.
And that's a great story technique. And unfortunately, as the world has gotten smaller and smaller with technology, and we have cell phones and the internet and all this stuff, these kind of stories are harder and harder to tell. So you have to pick these really remote, Antarctica, right? And ice.
Yeah.
But, they're in the forest, there's no cell phone service and stuff like that. So it's a good way to isolate people for drama.
And the good news is, really, if you were doing, you're doing if there's another season of the X-Files, and we're all presuming there will be, you could conceivably do the same kind of story now, in that, if you're in the middle of a forest, you're still probably not going to get a signal. You're probably still not going to connect to GPS or get a phone signal, So even in this day and age, these kind of shows can still be done, can't they, really? Mm-hmm. It's a short teaser, but it's an effective one, I think, that gets across that these men are in danger, that something's in the forest, and then we see the swarm, the CGI swarm of little green gribblies come down, and that's it really. It's short but creepy and quite scary.
You really, it's hard to even understand what's happening, but it's effective. Like, you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
I want to know, like, what's going to happen here?
Unlike Shapes, where you're very aware of
Like, oh,
what's
he's
going
a
on.
werewolf. Let's get to it.
Exactly. This makes you go, what are these creepy bug things?
Exactly.
So after the credits, we are back in the FBI this time. We do have more of a standard briefing scene, and quite often some of these briefing scenes there are little elements added to it, or there's some sparkiness, but in this was fairly standard, wasn't it? It's just Mulder explaining the deaths. And
it was standard, but when Mulder's explaining that you see all these men, Scully, they vanished, and he changes slides and it's like an empty slide. Like, did he do that for dramatic effect? Like,
he might have done, like, ta-da, they're
exactly.
gone. But it's mainly, obviously to explain the concept, and also the fact that
It's happened
these
before.
men, these men disappeared in the 1930s originally, and that's really his main interest, because obviously something's going on that's historic, and it's not just a one-off thing. So that's the spur for him to get involved. And then they're out in the forest, like Ice. Very, very quick preamble, set up. Here's the situation. Let's get on with it, really. And it does that quite well. And we get the first celebrity spot in this case, which is Jason Beeg. I think that's how you say his surname. Jason Beeg, who plays Larry the Sheriff. I don't know if you're familiar with Jason Beeg.
I am familiar with him from Chicago PD.
Okay.
He is the captain of their unit there. Now, I don't watch it all the time. I have a couple of friends that do, and it's basically the whole Chicago fill-in-the-blank series, like the Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, Chicago MD, or something. It's basically replacing the whole Law and Order franchise on NBC. And there's like a whole like shared universe of like Law and Order in Chicago. There's like crossovers and stuff all the time. So
the Chicago extended universe.
Yes, exactly. There's comic book tie-ins. There's like but yeah, I was surprised to see him here. This is obviously a while ago. So what else has he been in?
He was. Well, it's funny because my friend Matt Latham, who's also been on the X-Cast, he messages me. He's watching the X-Files now, and he's watching Darkness Falls actually as we record, I believe. And he messaged me saying, "Where have I seen the sheriff guy from before?" And I think he's seen him in Californication, because he played. Which is David Duchovny's next series after the X-Files. And he was a recurring role in, I think, season 3 of that, and he played a professor. The reason is that Jason Beeg is one of David Duchovny's best friends, historically. Okay. Yeah, they studied together, and they worked together as bartenders and then as actors. So they're I think it's basically his best mate. So, yeah, he's cropped up on Californication, and I wouldn't be surprised if he probably has cropped up or will crop up on Aquarius as well, which is David Duchovny's new series. So... yeah, that's
which is on NBC with Chicago PD, so I'm sure it's going to happen.
There you go. It's destined.
They're going to tie it all together.
Exactly.
I think he did a great job in this episode.
Yeah, he's a good actor, actually. He is a good actor. He's quite scruff and taciturn, really. He's, no messing. He's a straight down the line kind of actor, really. And he works well in the episode as he's kind of like the centre point, isn't he, really, Larry the Sheriff? Larry Moore, he's the rock, really, of the group.
Right, because you have like we said, Paul Reiser from Aliens, that guy, and then we have the activists as well. So they're on both ends of the spectrum, and he's right in the middle, trying to balance it all.
Yeah, we meet then just soon after Steve Humphries, who is the Paul Reiser. We'll just call him the Paul Reiser. Right. He's just the company git, really. The company bastard.
He wasn't that bad. Like, he wasn't like flat out evil or anything like that.
No, but he was just
guy.
Yeah, he was just a bit of a dick, wasn't he? I mean, there was a comment he made when they're driving up to the cabin, and he's talking about the eco-terrorists, and he's laying out how the fact these people are sabotaging our work and everything. He says something about how these guys are probably like those guys who went up to Canada in the Vietnam War, these tree huggers. And there's a little look from Scully as if to say, "Well, you're not a very nice man, are you?" It's like, he's just a bit of a dick. Really.
Well, speaking of Scully, I gotta love her 90s jacket, right? That is like the most 90s jacket ever. I think my mom used to have a jacket like that in the 90s.
Yeah, it is the multicolored one with like the blue and the pink.
Yeah, it's like blue and pink and like teal.
Yeah, totally. It reminds me of something that we used to have in the UK around that point called shell suits. And I don't think they spread to the States.
I don't think so. Did not make it across the pond.
No, count your lucky stars, Zach. Just Google them, right? Google shell suits and you'll see them because they are horrendous. And they're a fashion item. And they're a bit like that, really gaudy and just awful.
I will check them out. Well, the 90s fashion is just awful.
Yeah, it was like an early 90s fashion especially.
The
it was
worst.
Like
that odd transition between the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. It still was the after effects of the 80s. So then obviously as they're driving up, as Humphreys is explaining that the eco-terrorists, or tree huggers as he calls them, are the bad guys, there's a spike in the road that busts the tyre. And that is another suggestion that the episode feels like at first it's building up people like Spinney and these terrorists to be bad guys. And by having that spike in the road, it's like, oh, well, maybe these guys are bad guys.
Although, were we ever supposed to believe that they killed the campers? Because we saw, as you said, the CGI bugs come down. You know what I mean? So
yeah. I don't know if it's suggesting that, but I think it's
they're just trying to make it morally ambiguous, probably.
A little bit, yeah, and also adding a little bit of difficulty in them getting up to the cabins. There, they've got to walk.
Right,
and taking
it busts both tires. It busts two tires, so they can't just switch the tire. That's the biggest problem with the car. They're two tires short now.
And then they've got an extra. That means they've got a vehicle down if they need to make an escape. So in terms of setting up difficulty for them later as well, it's actually a decent thing.
More isolation, absolutely.
Exactly, yeah. So they get to the cabin and they're having a look around, and I did like the fact that it's got like all the meals on the table that are unfinished, and it's that classic sort of. When people disappear in classic stories and, you hear from real life.
Right in the midst of things, yeah. I think that there's the most famous one is Roanoke, I believe. Like, yes. The whole village just disappeared, and and no one can figure out why, because it's like in the middle of a meal, and it's just clearly life was happening, and then it just stopped. And it's very mysterious. And that is a very unsettling thing when you see something like that. It's one thing to just see like an abandoned building with nothing in it, but to see like there was life here and it just stopped in a split second.
Just gone.
Yeah.
It's
very
because people don't just abandon a meal, do they? Unless there's a reason. So I did quite like that, really. And it's isolated enough for there to be that, that sense of something's going on here, and we've got a taste of it already. But then it's really when they discover the body in the hive, in the first cocoon, that we realise that something here is not good at all. Although, I don't know about you, I did think they got that winch working quite fast for Scully.
Well, I guess, they're mountain people. They're up there. Yeah. The sheriff knows what to do, So, that was a rather makeshift, in a hurry winch they had there.
It's like they're looking up at this fence and suddenly Scully's winching. Yeah. That's quite good.
So when they cut open the cocoon, though, and they see it's a person, it really freaks Scully out. But then they continue to kind of look, and Scully says, "It's a male." And Mulder says, "Barely." It's like, come on, Mulder. Now is not the time for your shenanigans here, man.
Well, yeah, exactly. I have a few issues with Mulder in this episode, but we'll get to that. I have a few issues in terms of his characterization, which I think are an example there, but that's to come. So yeah, they see the body, and then at the same time, Humphreys goes into the cabin, and this is where we meet Doug Spinney, who's the eco-terrorist who's been causing mischief, as it's been routinely said. And this is the other celebrity spot, Titus Welliver, from several different shows. I think now he's on a show called Bosch.
Yeah, have you seen Bosch?
I haven't. No, is it any good?
I haven't, but it looks really good, and it's getting good reviews. So it's one of those. It's either Hulu or Amazon Prime. I'm not sure. Neither which service I have, so I haven't had a chance to check it out. But it looks really good. I've heard really good things, and he's just one of these faces you see. He was actually in a couple of Star Trek Voyager episodes, and he's a face he's been in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. What stuck out to me most is apparently, how you were saying how the sheriff here, the actor Jason Bigg, is Duchovny's best friend. I think Titus here might be Ben Affleck's best friend, because he's been in Gone Baby Gone, The Town, and Argo. So
That'd be, yeah, maybe.
Affleck continues to use him in his movies, but hey, yeah, like he's a working actor. You see him all the time, and I think he does a great job in this episode. I really liked him.
He's good. He looks very young. I know him mainly from Lost because he appears at the end of Lost as a very important character to the mythology of that.
Okay, he was in Lost, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's that's where I first really got to know him. But yeah, he's very good. He's a good actor, and he is good in this. He does play that sort of moral ambiguity slightly, in that he's not a bad guy. He never feels like a bad guy, but equally he feels like somebody who would go to extreme lengths to save these trees.
Well, normally I hate these tree hugger characters, because they just, the way they're written and acted, like it's usually, and we see it later on in the X-Files, where there's like these activist characters, and it's like, ugh, this is
fearful
not,
symmetry.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Thank you so much. I have to be on that episode, by the way.
I think you will be, yeah. She is the worst.
Oh my gosh.
World. Yeah.
But Titus here really pulls it off, I think, and you can see that moral ambiguity.
He does. He gets that. He gets that well, really. And him coming in, obviously, is look, a foretelling of danger, because he's survived out there and he's lost his team. And he said, he's saying that you've got to be careful. You've got to stay in the dark, in the light, I should say.
Stay in the dark.
Don't stay in the dark. And this is where we get, obviously, there's quite a few scenes that are where Mulder and Scully are quite observers, really, because there's a lot of dialogue between Humphreys and Spinney, and then Larry's involved, sort of mediating between the two. But it's putting the two ideologies across, in that you've got Humphreys who's basically saying, we're taking trees that we were allowed to do. You're sabotaging our work. You're putting men's lives in danger. You may have caused these people to go missing. All this stuff. And then Spinney, on the other hand, is saying, well, yeah, you're taking trees that are protected, that are years old. So it's a good little argument, I think. And much as Humphreys is more of a dick, and he's not very sympathetic, there's two good points to be made, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a good conversation. It kind of lays out all the dynamics of what's going on here, and it doesn't feel preachy at all. It just feels like two guys discussing, their points of view and what they do in a very natural way.
Yeah, it does feel very naturalistic. I thought that at one point about the dialogue and the way the actors were portraying the characters. They did feel very natural. They felt like they weren't trying too hard. And that's the script, and I like the fact that Mulder and Scully don't really get involved. They're just watching. They're us. They're observing, really. Mm-hmm. And they don't really comment. They're just there to find these people. I like that. And I like the scene with the trees, and when we get the explanation of the tree rings, and we see the tree that's been cut down, and how this, corporate deforestation has led to this, what's going on in this forest. And it's just it's a nice bit of science, and obviously you can tell that Chris Carter actually is, as we've said, you can tell that Chris Carter's interested in the subject.
Yeah, even though I don't know anything about the tree rings and that kind of thing, I feel like I learned something from this episode. So
yeah, so did I.
It didn't feel like stupid pseudoscience. It felt like something authentic. Yeah,
because you can tell that he knows about it, and that he's interested in the biology of it, and the whole idea that it's this whole idea that trees are kind of alive, and which is something you don't really think about on a day-to-day basis. You don't really think about when, you see there are trees everywhere. Right. And especially the big, old, massive trees that have been, and as they said, this one was there for like 500-600 years before it was cut down. You think about that, and how much these trees sort of are breathing, they're sort of alive in their own way. And it's fascinating, really, to remember that, really. Mm-hmm. It allows the setup, obviously, of the story, and how, at this point, Humphreys decides that he's going to go off and he's going to sort this out himself. He's fed up of Larry not really doing what he should be doing, arresting Spinney.
Yeah, he's getting frustrated. He's like, wait, what's a tree going to tell you about how these men disappeared? Because, he wants to take a core sample, which, they're just trying to investigate. Scully says, we're trying to figure out what's going on here, sir. He's being pretty unreasonable.
Do you think he did know that the marked trees were being cut down?
I don't know. I think it could go either way. They play it pretty ambiguous, which is fine. He probably knew every now and then they were cutting down some marked trees and didn't really care. He seemed to care more about, the business side of things and the nature side of things. So it would not, even if he didn't know, it doesn't bother him that it happened, I think. Because he's always making excuses. He's like, let me remind you that these guys blew up our car and they paint their own paint on trees. So he's quick to use excuses to argue against Spinney, so it could go either way. But that's what I'm saying. He doesn't come off as like, he was an evil guy that knew about it the whole time and just didn't care. He doesn't come off that way. He just comes off as kind of just a jerk in personality more than anything else.
Yeah, basically, yeah. That's exactly what it is. And he's more, like you say, he's more interested in the money-making side and the business, and and that kind of thing. And you know, in the end, he walks into his own doom, doesn't he? You know, and he goes off, and they're saying, well, you know, you got to be careful, and he's like, I don't believe in any of this, blah blah blah, and then you do get his death sequence, which is it's well done, I think. That he's trapped in that car, and all the bugs are starting to come through his aircon system, his ventilation. And
why did he not bring the keys with him to the truck? Like, because he gets down to the truck and he's like going to start the truck. He's like, oh. And then he looks in the overhead, the sunshade, and they're not there. He's like, oh. And he looks in the local part, and then they're not there. He's like, oh. It's like, why did you go down there without the key? Because it's the trooper's car, right? It's the sheriff or the park ranger's car. So just, hey, I'm going to go down to your car and get on the radio. That's a great plan. But bring the keys. Like... that set up the whole thing of him getting trapped down there.
Yeah. Did you not think to ask him, or did he just? Yeah. It's because I kept thinking when he was looking for the keys, I was like, well, why haven't you got them in the first place?
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking that. Yeah.
But that aside, yes, it's a very creepy because it's isolation, right? He's all by himself down there, and you can really sense that he is really scared out of his mind.
Yeah.
Because you would be too of all these glow in the dark bugs. Because look. These things are creepy. Like, they're getting all over you, and then you hear them, like, scream in the car. And it's kind of like Jurassic Park when Nedry gets trapped in there with the Dilophosaurus, you know?
Yeah.
It's, anyway.
Which is one of the best scenes, I think, in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
That whole scene. Yeah. And again, similar kind of character in there, isn't it? Somebody who's, quite unsympathetic. But it's the first time as well we see the bugs actually attack someone, isn't it, really, fully? I mean, we've seen them in the teaser approach those guys, but we haven't seen what they do. In this case, we see that they're really getting into his skin, and you hear that horrible crunching sound that's like they're eating his flesh. It's like, it just ends a bit of makes you shake a little bit. It does me anyway. While up in the cabin, as this is happening, they're basically having conversations. So it's Mulder, Scully, Larry, and Spinney talking about trying to work out what the bugs are. And this is where Mulder basically starts putting forward his theories as to the fact that they're potentially these ancient larvae. And I think he makes a few leaps here, but I think
kind of a jump, Mulder. Kind of a jump.
Yeah, I can just about buy it.
Well, the tree, the tree is supposed to be 500 years old, and they're saying, well, when Mount St. Helens blew up, things from under the earth came out in the air and maybe inhabited these trees. So he's connecting a lot of dots that don't necessarily connect, but that's what Mulder does, right?
Yeah, it is. And by the end, there's no direct confirmation of that. There's no...
that's true.
It's the theory that he puts out there. And there's some interesting background information about this. The creature mentioned by Mulder and Spinney in the episode is a brain-eating amoeba, or Naegleria fowleri amoeba, which does indeed live in Spirit Lake and has likely been affected by the Mount St. Helens eruption, though not in the way that Mulder implies. N. fowleri amoebae live in warm freshwater environments, from lakes to hot springs, and in 1991 they were observed living in Spirit Lake. Rather than being a mutation, as Mulder suggests, though, it's thought that they simply always lived in the lake, and the eruption simply made conditions ripe for them to multiply. If inhaled by a person, they migrate to the brain and feed on brain tissue with a sucking apparatus, though sucking a man's brain out is probably a stretch. So there is a certain scientific basis in an amoeba that does exist for this. And
I was wondering if that was real, because they'll mention things all the time that, like, this happened in 1957, and it's like, well, no, it didn't. But I was wondering if that was a real entity. So that's interesting. Once again, Chris Carter doing his homework on this episode.
Exactly. You do feel that with this. As I've said before, you do feel that he knows what he's talking about with the science. And that's something that doesn't always happen on the X-Files. And Scully really has to strain in order to get some science ideas in there. But in this, it does feel like that. And again, it's similar to ice, in the whole idea of an extinct millions-year-old species under the ground that's come up.
Although in ice it's a little more realistic, because we all can buy, something was frozen, so it's preserved. But the bugs living inside the tree for that long, I don't know about that. That seems a little bit of a stretch to me. But I don't know all the science that they do, so I will trust their better judgment. But the ice, just in layman's terms, when you explain to me, this was frozen in the ice for millions of years. Okay, and it's alien. Okay, I'll buy that. There's a lot of variables there I don't know. But when you tell me these bugs that are from Earth came up through a volcano and then, like, were inside of a tree, they just existed in that tree until it was cut down, like, to me that's odd. But hey, I'll go with it.
Well, I'm sure in dialogue though, somebody says in it what they were in that tree. I'm sure somebody says something along those lines.
Says that.
Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, it is a leap. It is definitely a leap, but it's good that there is some kind of basis explanation for it, for why they're now, and for the fact they're now out, and they've spread, and that for hundreds of years they've been trapped in this ancient tree, in this old tree that's now been cut down through the deforestation by these people who aren't doing what they should be doing. So it's, but this is where we get the few instances of Mulder's characterization not working for me, and the big one is I can't believe he would let Spinny go.
See, this is interesting because I kind of agree with Mulder here, and putting myself in a situation, I probably would have done the same thing, which is why I forgive him. Maybe that's me projecting myself on the episode too much, but I feel like Mulder makes reckless decisions all the time, and that leads to a great conversation later with him and Scully, where he can tell like she's mad at him, and the sheriff is mad at him, like, you let him go with the gas, because Spinny comes out there and he's like working on a car, and he has a gas can, and Mulder asks him, "Oh, we planning on going somewhere?" And Spinny explains that, "Look, my guys are at the other camp. I need this gas. They're gonna die. I have to go over there and help them. We got a Jeep over there. I'll come back and get you guys, I promise." And Mulder's like, "Okay, you can go." So that didn't sit well with you.
It just seems like a massive. I understand why he does it, and to be fair, Scully does call him on it later.
That's a great. That's a great scene, because he's like, "What would you have done?" And she says, "Oh, you mean would I have made a decision by myself that affected the entire group?" Like, ooh, burn, Scully.
Yeah. And then he does have the cheek at one point to say to her, "I'll cut out the sanctimonious crap." And I feel like, oh, hang on a minute, Mulder. You're the one who's fucked up here. This is your fault, right? You've let a man go who is not necessarily to be trusted with everything we need to survive, a deadly whatever it is out there, and be based on a gut feeling that, you think he's on the level.
Well, but Mulder believes people all the time, so to me it wasn't that big of a stretch. You know what I mean?
Well, but what's it? Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. I think the script kind of does that. The script is very much a case of Mulder knows that he didn't necessarily make the right decision, but at the same time, we understand why he would do it, and his reasoning behind that, as you've said. So it's fairly well written in the sense that it doesn't completely make Mulder. It doesn't completely show him up to be an idiot, but at the same time, I do think it's a bit of an error in judgment, and I think it's partly for the plot convenience sake, and I think it's in order to get Spinny away, so in the end we can get Spinny back with that Jeep.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's to put the plot in motion. Yeah, I see.
A little bit, and I think it for me, it's not quite Mulder. I thought the biggest thing that was out of character was when he tells Scully to cut out the crap.
Yeah,
I didn't think that sounded like him at all. Because
in that scene, he was at least he knew he messed up,
Yeah.
And he didn't really apologize, but he's like, "Look, it happened. Let's just move on from it. We'll figure something out." But for him to kind of lash back out of here was uncalled for.
You could potentially explain it as tension. Control, contained environment. They're under the cosh with something, but I'd believe that a lot more in Ice when they were genuinely being psychologically affected by everything. In this case, I don't really believe that. I just think it's a bit of an out of character snap by Mulder that doesn't really fit, and it just didn't sit completely well with me. But I think you can look at it either way in terms of what he did with Spinny. But yeah, it's. I just think Ice did a lot better job of cranking up the tension, really. Although I did like the bit where Scully freaks out when she starts seeing the bugs.
Well,
that was good.
The sheriff, I keep calling him, I don't know what his position was, the sheriff, the cop, the park ranger. But he tells Scully, he's like, "Okay, be careful. This is the only light bulb that works." Okay, we cut to later that night, and then Scully sees all the bugs, right? And hey, if I saw this, I would probably react very similar to Scully, because that's just disgusting. You see all the glow-in-the-dark bugs crawling, and she sees they're crawling on her, and she sees they're crawling everywhere, and she starts just flailing about.
Yeah.
And she backs into the light. I was like, oh, no, she's not going to break the light, is she?
But it's especially creepy when Mulder basically says, "Look, they are everywhere. They're all over us. But it's only because we're in the light that we're fine." And you think, oh, God, if they get out, if that light goes. It's just a good way of making the point that they really are, dependent on this. Although I do think that they could have got some more moments of real sort of horror and tension out of the lights going off. There could have been some examples there where I don't know, if the generator had died in the middle of the night and briefly, and then the lights go off and they're starting to swarm, and then somebody rushes to get the generator back working again, and it just comes back on, and they, something like that. That would have been
that would
great.
have added something else, because I guess, like I said earlier, I did feel it was a little repetitive. Like, oh, we're waiting on the light. Hopefully it lasts.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay, it's still on. Oh, okay. Oh,
Good.
are we gonna make it? Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There was no escalation. It was just constant. It didn't escalate at all.
No, exactly, and that's why I don't think it's quite up to par with Ice, because Ice had that sense of escalation in the same kind of thing. In this case, you've got these scenes of certain clashes, people going off and dying, and then the generator dies just as the sun comes up, and I think, well, that's a bit of a... I understand why, because then it's getting them away from the cabin and getting them onto the road, but I thought to myself, you could have done a lot more with the threat of that power going.
Right, and then it makes the whole Mulder decision of letting him leave with the gas less important because they made it, so...
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It validated what he did a bit more.
It's like, see, I told you guys it was going to be fine.
Yeah. In this case, they still have to get out of there. The morning's come, they decide they've got to get out of there, the generator's gone, they need to get out, they manage to get another tyre that they then start rolling down the mountain in order to get away, which doesn't really have, again, it does not have fat lot of tension, but then when we get to the it's just, let's roll a tyre down a mountain.
It did look kind of comical, just the time, because there's a couple of shots where it's just a tire by itself before they catch up to it.
Yeah. Okay. And then they find Humphreys, and then you get that. There's a really nice music cue though, where they're walking around the cocooned car, and then Mark Snow's music really builds up, and then as it cuts to Humphreys, it's and you just see him pressed against the glass.
Yeah.
That was a really horrific kind of cue. I thought that was well done. It was a nice little cue that makes you go. Oh. It's lucky then that Spinney turns up in the Jeep. It's quite. What would they have done if he hadn't turned up in the Jeep at that point?
They give him some. It's some sense of. What do you call it? Redemption for him. Because obviously, him and his group, his activist group, are the reason a lot of these people are in this situation, because they spiked the road, they did this, they did that. That's why the sheriff's car, whatever he is, sheriff, park ranger, cop, whatever. Yeah. That's why his car got messed up in the first place, and they were short a tire and all this stuff. So that group's actions, even though they were not responsible for the disappearance and death of all the forest workers, they still screwed a lot of stuff up. So. This is some sense of redemption, but apparently it wasn't quite enough. Because he still meets a rather gruesome end.
A sticky end, that's true. And that's the point where they get away, but and this is where Spinney is hoisted by his own petard as well, in the same way, where it's another one of his traps that causes that Jeep to go off the road. And that's it then, Spinney runs off. I did wonder though, because obviously that by the time the car is damaged, that it's dark and they started driving in the light. How far away did they get, and how far do these bugs spread?
Yeah, because we gotta go right now. It's like, dude, it's like 3:00 in the afternoon. I think we're okay. We got time, right?
We got time.
That's a good point. I did wonder how long is the drive into town or whatever, and how far. Yeah, you're right. How far are they swarming?
Well, exactly. Is it that they're already on them? This is the thing, because Mulder did say
that's a good
they're
point.
already on us. And maybe it's that but it looked like they were swarming from everywhere when they get them in the van. And Spinney's attacked outside. I don't know. It just seemed like if they've spread, then that's a big area they've covered, because they would have spent quite a while on the road. They would have got a fair few miles. So I don't know. It makes you wonder.
I didn't think about that. That's a good point. Where I guess when the daylight shows up, all the bugs leave and they're no longer on them anymore.
Yeah,
that's really the only explanation. But I hadn't thought of that.
It must be. Yeah, I don't know. But I think what I really do like about this, what really does make this episode memorable for me, is the fact that the bugs actually do get them.
Yes,
and I think
that
that's
was very
really
surprising,
brave.
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because in any other episode, they would have got away. They would have found a way to get away, or there would have been something that helps. But it's genuine. Chris Carter presumably went, well, I've written them into a corner. Let's embrace the corner.
Yeah.
That
was a bold move. You're right, because usually something would happen just in the nick of time, and they would not be caught by the bugs. I guess this is a very unique situation where getting caught by the quote villain, you can still you can come back from that. You know, it's not like they kill you instantaneously. They just put you in a cocoon. So, fortunately, Spinney had mentioned that he had already called for help on his radio, so that means that help is coming. But yeah, no, kudos to Chris Carter for going all in and having Mulder and Scully and the cop / park ranger / whatever he is,
whatever,
get hit by the bugs. I mean, that actually added a nice end to the episode, because it did feel kind of anticlimactic, as I referenced earlier when we first started talking about it. It's like, oh, they're running from the sunset. Okay.
Yeah.
They're running, and oh, here come the bugs. And it's like the same thing we'd seen, 2 or 3 times already now. So that's to see Mulder and Scully especially, get hit, really escalated things, which is what this episode needed. There wasn't enough escalation in this episode.
No.
This was finally some escalation.
Yeah, it was a good sense of payoff for something that really was a genuine. It makes the threat even more powerful.
Absolutely.
By actually having them cocooned and having them only just get away with it. They do try and do this same trick in Field Trip in season 6, but it doesn't work as well as this. In the whole idea that Mulder and Scully get caught up in something that almost kills them. And what I like about this is that they really do almost die. Especially Scully. That they even say when they're in the base at the end, he even says, well, she's not quite out of the woods yet.
Yeah. So to speak, haha, because they're in the forest. I get it.
Very good. Very good. But yeah, it's a really good ending that I think it just leaves you really quite creeped out by the end. And, having them in a facility that in any other instance of the X-Files would be a government base with some kind of alien thing going on, wouldn't it?
Exactly. The imagery there is very similar to all the other mythology stuff you see with aliens, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you wonder who they are. If presumably they're the CDC or someone like that, but you're not sure really. And it's a good way of having a final conversation with Mulder and this scientist where. They've been put through the ringer. They've just got out of it alive. And then you get some really creepy Mark Snow music at the end. It's that very sort of open-ended kind of...
Yeah. Because Mulder, he's like, Mulder and the scientists are talking, and the scientist says, we are confident that a combination of controlled burns, and pesticides will eliminate the problem. And Mulder says, well, what if that's not enough? And he says, that is not an option, Mr. Mulder. And then there's that creepy Mark Snow music kicks in. Yeah,
as if to say, and Mulder's just watching him go as if to say, shit.
It's like a slow pan out, and it sits on Mulder. It's a very unsettling ending, and I almost felt like an ending like a Twilight Zone episode. Like I expected Rod Serling to come on, the narration to start happening here. Picture man.
Which is one of the biggest compliments you could give the episode, really.
For sure, yeah.
Definitely. It's great in that sense. It's a really, really nice ending for an episode that sometimes doesn't have that climactic element that it should. So it's a really nice and brave way to end it. And I really, really like the last 5 minutes. It's great. It's the best thing of it for me.
Yeah, it really pushes it over 5 territory if we're using our rating scale here. Yeah.
So that was Darkness Falls, a good ending to a pretty decent episode. So with that, let's move on to our next piece, which is speaking about the specific paranormality in the episode. So, Zach, do you believe in ancient organisms?
I was wondering what you were going to ask me.
This has been a difficult one. This is a difficult one. I suppose the big question is, because with the X-Files doesn't always have, sometimes, like Shapes, which we did previously, you could have werewolves. That's an easy one to do. Some episodes of the X-Files
of course
don't
there's
always
werewolves.
have
Everyone
that.
knows there's werewolves. Slam dunk.
But in this case, do you believe that there could be any kind of, perhaps, sort of ancient larvae or amoeba that potentially could exist in nature that could, if not do exactly like this, that could be a potential threat or could be from a different kind of species or part of human evolution or something like that?
I would go with the cold. I think in the cold it's very possible, because bacteria can stay dormant and low temperatures and stuff like that. So I could see that. Viruses, I know they're very different things, but all of these kinds of things we're talking about in the cold weather and the cold environment and the snow and the ice, I think it's possible. Like I don't think they might be millions of years old. That's a bit of a stretch because I don't think anything can really stay alive that long. But I know there have been reports of plants and flowers that have been dormant for X amount of years that have come back to life. So there is some sort of precedent in nature for this, as we talked about. Chris Carter did some research, so it's not completely off the wall science here. But yeah, unless it's in like the cold, then no, because living inside of a tree, I still can't quite wrap my head around that. Like, how does the whole life cycle of an organism, especially something like a bug here, right? It's not a virus, it's not a bacteria, it's an entity. I mean, they have to eat, they have to procreate. You would assume, right? Who knows how these things operate? But I'm a hesitant yes in certain environmental conditions, basically.
I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Really, it's not an easy question to answer in the sense that if you're not a scientist and you're not massively aware.
I'm not
of this,
qualified to answer this question.
It's a difficult one, but yeah, I think in terms of the episode and what it puts across, I think it's a relatively believable threat from nature, really, and I think it's something that sometimes the X-Files has things in it that are completely made up and more almost certainly couldn't happen. But I think something like this, you could imagine perhaps existing somewhere on Earth that people may discover, and it's whether or not it would be a threat to human biology or not would be a big question, really.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what's the episode in season 2 with the virus that the guy finds in like South America or something, and it starts spreading.
F. emasculata.
Yeah, that's a tough title to remember. But
particular favourite episode of that, mine. That actually, I love that episode. Yeah, and he finds it on an animal species, doesn't he? And then
it was like on a boar. That was disgusting.
The big pustules.
That was so nasty.
It's true, but yeah, it's an interesting idea, and let's hope people don't find something like they do in this forest. Otherwise, we need to make sure we've got plenty of light bulbs,
right?
For sure. But okay, let's move on to the last part of the episode, which is the X quiz. And this is 5 episodes, 5 questions and a quote on Darkness Falls. You've previously scored 4 on 2 different occasions, Zach. So are you hoping to beat your score this time?
I am just happy if I can maintain my score. These are hard questions, man.
They might be difficult. Okay, question 1. What is the name of the forest where the action takes place?
I don't know. I do not know at all. I don't.
Okay, it's the Olympic National Forest.
Oh, okay. I probably should have written that down.
It's in the little thing at the start. It
sounds rather pretentious. The Olympic National Forest. But...
Question 2. Between how old does Larry say the tree that he's cut down was?
I think it's like 400 to 600, something like that.
Yeah, that's basically right. Yeah, he says between 5, or he reckons it's about 500 to 600 years old. So yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, that was a Douglas fir tree, as it says. Yeah. So, question 3: when Mulder and Scully are located at the end to the high containment facility, what town in Washington is that based in?
I don't know. I don't even know enough cities in Washington to guess. So.
It's called Winthrop.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that. So,
I suppose that's quite a difficult one, really.
I got to start paying attention to these captions more often.
Yeah. Speaking of difficult ones, this is probably fiendish, but I'll ask you anyway. Steve Humphries is the head of security for which lumber company?
Oh. It's probably like some acronym or something, right? With some letters.
Well, it's got a difficult name to remember or to pronounce. It's the Schiff Immergut lumber company.
Of course, the Schiff Immergut company. How could I forget?
Okay, finally, question 5. How many loggers are in the picture from the 1930s team who went missing? Now, I'll give you a window of 2 either way for this to get the point.
All right. This will be important. The window will be important. I know there are 30 loggers now, and that picture looked like there were about half the amount of people. So I'm going to go with 15.
Oh, that's not far off. It's 12.
12? Oh, that was 3 away. Oh, no. All right.
I can't quite give you that. But yeah, 12 loggers in the picture.
That's only fair. Well, not only did I not beat my score, I did worse than I have on the previous episode. That's a good question, though. The picture. That's a good question. So.
It's not a bad question, yeah. Well, finally, there's a quote, so you've got a chance to score another point. You've got 1
that's right.
point.
I forget how many questions there are. I'm just I'm flaming out. I'm flaming out.
There's one more. Okay, the quote. So, if you can get who it is and where, that'd be good.
All right.
Anything strange, unexplainable, unlikely? A boyfriend?
Oh, Mulder is asking Scully that about the picture of the loggers he's showing.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I just like that. I like it's just a very throwaway thing. Boyfriend. So okay, that's 2. That's 2 out of 5. That's all right. That's not bad. That's not a 0.
I only got 2.
Yeah, they were difficult because you got the one question. You got another quote. They were hard. They were difficult.
This is not my strongest hour.
They were difficult.
Of X. The law of averages has caught up to me now. So.
They were tough. They were very tough. So yeah, I apologise.
I mean, that's part of it. That's part of it.
Okay, so that's been Darkness Falls. Darkness has fallen. So all it remains for me to do is thank you, Zach, for coming on once again and discussing this one.
Thank you, Tony. It's always fun to talk about the X-Files with a fellow fan.
Absolutely. Very true, very true. So tell us how the Smallville podcast is going and everything, anywhere we can find you online.
Yeah, the Smallville podcast is great. I launched it in February, and people have been responding well to it, so it's been fun. My podcast is called Always Hold On to Smallville, and we talk about each and every episode of Smallville, which is the Young Superman show from the 2000s. And you can find us on Twitter at Always Smallville. That's with 1 S, Always Smallville. The Twitter has a character limit, so I couldn't have Always Smallville. And, it looks better with just 1 S anyway.
Yeah, no, it does.
And you can always also find us on Facebook at Always Hold On to Smallville. And then me personally am on Twitter. I'm at MoronZach, MoorEonzach. That's me personally on Twitter.
Thank you. That's great. Definitely, as I've said before, definitely check out Always Hold On to Smallville. It's a great show. And enjoy Zach's journey through that TV series. I certainly am myself.
There is a lot of crossover between Smallville and the X-Files. I mean, Mark Snow, who does all the music on the X-Files, obviously does the music for the first 5 or so seasons of Smallville. And then, of course, there's a lot of actors. They filmed it up in Canada as well, so there's a lot of the same locations and the day players and the recurring background characters and stuff like that. So there's actually a lot of crossover.
Very similar, yeah, in many ways.
It also lasted too long.
Even longer than this. That's true.
Well, no, it's actually X-Files and Smallville is tied now because they each 10 seasons.
Oh, of course.
If we can't, when the X-Files, of course, knock on wood, right? The X-Files comes back for the next season. Do you think it'll be like a Breaking Bad or Mad Men situation where they'll call it like season 10.5 or, you know what I mean? Or will they be season 11? What do you think?
I think it'll be season 11 myself because it's interesting in foreign territories. It's not even, a lot of people aren't even calling it season 10. It's being referred to as the mini series or the event series or something like that. So it's only really a lot of fans who are calling it season 10 in many respects, because it's not a traditional season length. So
yeah, they're going all Sherlock on us.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. Just not as good, unfortunately. But it's controversial. But yeah, we have to keep our fingers crossed for more season 11. So, but yeah, until then, enjoy Smallville. Let that fill the void and enjoy Zach's show. So definitely look it up. You can find us, as ever, at the X_cast on Twitter and the Xcast on Facebook. And we're on iTunes. Do subscribe. Let us know what you think. Do email as well at the xfcast@gmail.com. You know, any thoughts on the show are welcome. Any thoughts on the X-Files are welcome. A bit of feedback would be lovely. So that'd be great. We're part of the Black Hole Media podcast on Facebook and on Twitter at Black Hole Media. Look us up. Lots of different podcasts about movies, TV, everything. So lots to talk about and lots to get involved with. So, yeah, you'll be back in Season 2, Zach, I think, on the Xcast when we get into the next season.
Yes, I will see you on the other side.
Yeah. Yes. Until then, thanks very much again. And remember, guys, trust no one.